Every experiencer has to overcome ontological shock, and we have to do it while the world tells us we're crazy. Because of this, each of us has our own story, our own helpful perspective, our own set of tools. These are the stories we share in the Experiencer Workshop.
My co-host Tony asked me if I could take a half hour every week and I guess just talk to the camera. I guess maybe to start a different subsection on the YouTube channel, just maybe briefly describing some of the more important things that I had to go through to get through this experience and, dampen the chaos going on inside of my mind. And he asked me to really harness in on some of the more spiritual aspects of it, which is something that I really do promote within the community, is tapping into the spirituality behind all of this, the consciousness aspect of all of this, because there's a lot of cleansing that goes on there. So I guess I'll start this one with a discussion that we were having in our Discord this morning, where a member was being very overly optimistic about her day, and determined to, even during the brunt of the experience, to see the day as positive, which is great. And it's actually the main reason I started PositiveTI, was because in the beginning of this, the experience was so overwhelmingly negative that obviously I sought out its counterpart in being overwhelmingly positive, right? So, I was determined to make this work for me in a way. And I say this a lot, I was very blessed in my experience that when it started, I had a pregnant girlfriend, and we, there was a big push for me to really get my act together and to see the benefit in everything. And, it was always found, like, if you can really approach this thing with an education and enlightenment attitude and perspective, it can always be found. So, eventually what wound up happening, though, was you come to find that neither negative nor positive, being overwhelmingly negative or positive, is sustainable, right? It's hard work. It's a lot of work to put in being that negative every day or being that positive every day towards everything. So there's a level of equanimity that has to be found with all of this. Like, you have to find a middle ground. And for me, spiritually, this is why I was attracted to Buddhism, because one of the biggest teachings within Buddhism is the middle path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, the Eightfold Noble Path. And this is when you see the wheel of Buddhism, this is what you see. Each one of those spokes is one of those attributes. So, and developing those 8 things within myself, having the right view on life, setting the right intentions for things, having the right speech for everything, and then having that go forward with right action, and then right livelihood, having a right job, bringing in a good source of income, putting forth right effort into my life and the things that I wish to accomplish, and then maintaining my right mind and my right concentration, for all these things. It really did me a world of wonders. So, a big thing that I had to do was learn how to let go, right? And when I say let go, I mean let go of who I thought I was, right? Let go of the labels that I had placed upon myself and the labels that I had allowed others in the world to place upon me, and kind of return back to a point of emptiness. Like, I really had to hit the reset button with all of this. So if I can kind of give like a visual example here, right? Let's say that this guy here, right? This tube, let's say that this tube, right, which is empty, is you when you come into this world. You're just an empty vessel. You have yet to be filled with anything yet. You come into the world and you have no accumulation of anything, right? You're just here. And but the first thing that you're given, the first label that you're given when you come into the world, and I'll use myself as an example, is your name, right? So you're given your name, okay? And then as you get a little bit older, you come to find out, and this is also something that is given to you, that you have your heritage, right? That's a part of you. So we have Kevin, and Kevin came into this world from an Irish background. All right. So here we have a guy. His name is Kevin, and he's Irish. Okay. So these are two labels that I had growing up. All right. So already I'm starting to fill the form of these labels. Okay. And then as I got older, I think I was 4 years old, and my father was a heroin addict and an alcoholic. Okay. And these were his things that he had to deal with. So he left when I was 5 years old and left my mother and my older brother and I abandoned in a 2-bedroom apartment by ourselves. And I felt very abandoned. Right now, this is more of a just, I guess, an expression of how I felt at that time. These are just things that happened to me that happens with life in general. So we have Kevin, Irish, and abandoned. All right. And then as I got older, okay, and I went into school and I was bullied, a lot in school, and they would call me all kinds of names. And I'll apologize for my language, but this is just how life is, especially with kids. I was called a fag. Right. I remember that vividly. I was called a pussy. That was a big one. Right. So now at the age of 8, we have an Irish kid named Kevin who feels abandoned, and he's called a fag and a pussy all the time. Right. So these are the things that I started to acquire growing up. And then I started to, when I got into high school, dabble into drugs, and I picked up drugs and alcohol quickly, like very quickly. I mean, from the moment that I did them, I wanted to do more. Right. And then by the time I was 21, I was an alcoholic. Okay. And then by the time I was 22, 23, I was alcoholic. I was an addict. All right. And I spent my 21st birthday in a rehab. So now we have this thing that came into the world as an empty vessel, and now he has all these labels that are placed on him. Okay. So I went to my first rehab, and they start teaching you things about this kind of stuff, and the labels that are placed on us. But at that time I had to admit to this label. I had to say, I am an alcoholic. Boom. I am an addict. Boom. I had to admit to these labels all the time. This is who I am, right? I am an alcoholic. I am an addict. And the thing about labels is that, how the quote goes, once you label me, you negate me. Meaning, let's say that my mind is inside of this tube. Well, now I can never be anything else besides what you have labeled me. I will be an alcoholic and I will be an addict. And then I began to get in trouble because it didn't stick with me. It didn't resonate with me. So now, on top of all of these labels that I'm carrying with me, an Irish guy named Kevin who feels abandoned, as a fag and a pussy, an alcoholic and an addict, I am now a felon. That's another good one. That one goes on paper. Not only is that a induced label, or a label that's put upon you, but now that one's actually on paper that other people can see. And that one really carries with you. So now I'm a felon. And then I couldn't take care of my children. So now I'm an abandoned, I'm a deadbeat dad. I'm a loser, right? I'm getting thrown in jail. I'm a prisoner, right? So I start developing all these things, and I'm fighting with them. So, obviously, I'm going to say obviously, but what I did was, in typical fashion, I fought back with them, with their counterpart. I'm not a fag, right? I'm a man's man. I'm not a pussy. I'm strong, right? I'm not an addict or an alcoholic, right? I'm just like, so all these things. So we seek their other counterpart to counteract them. And then we're caught in this battle, right? This versus battle of good versus evil, evil versus good all the time. And then here comes the voices, right? And when the voices come in, they also took on that role, right? You know, they'd say, you're strong. And I'd say, yes, that's what I want to hear. I am strong. And they say, you're a man's man, right? You know, these kind of things, these very grandiose statements that kind of, I needed to hear, like I needed to hear that sort of affirmation. It made me feel good. And then what do? And then they turn on it. They completely turn on that, in my experience. And they harnessed in on every single one of these things. Boom, 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 boom. I mean, I can't tell you how many times my voices have called me a pussy or a fag or a drunk or an alcoholic, or, you know, all of these labels that I had placed on myself that I was carrying around. And they all had to be addressed one by one. And you know, spoken against. And it didn't matter how much I spoke against them, they still needed to be dealt with. So what helped for me was getting back to this point here, right? How I came into this world. And, you know, I guess that's going to be the main point of what I'm talking about now, is returning back to a point of nothingness. And in Buddhism and even in Zen teaching, nothingness and emptiness is a big part of the teaching. Having the understanding that every single one of us come into this world and, you know, labelless, right? We all come into this world without these labels that are placed on us. We all come into this world as containers, just empty. And then as life goes on and memories accumulate, we begin to associate ourselves with these labels. You know, events happen. Maybe we didn't handle something the way that we should have. We wanted to handle it. We don't accept the way that we handled something, and we feel a certain way about that. And then we place these labels on ourselves, and we judge ourselves, and we persecute ourselves, and we condemn ourselves. I dealt with so much self-condemnation throughout this. And, you know, first I had to learn to love myself again, after I addressed all of the labels, the good and the bad, right? And then I had to learn to eliminate those labels as being good or bad, and just look at them as labels. They're neither good nor bad. You know, whether you call me a fag, or you don't call me a fag, or you call me a pussy, or you call me a great guy, you know, to look at it as exactly the same, to not be affected by either. You know, as a rock is unaffected by the storm, so is a wise man unaffected by praise and blame. And getting to that level of emptiness and equanimity, because I went through the majority of my life in a state of contract and contrast, in a state of aversion and clinging. Yes, I like that you say that. Say more of that. I need to hear more of that, right? No, I don't like that you said that. Get the hell away from me. Don't ever say those things to me again, right? I was deeply affected both ways, you know, and then that would leave me in a state of wanting more or wanting less, always. Like I need more or I need less. So then you're just in a fight with words. You're in a fight for affection and non-affection. You know, you begin to take the world and people that are in the world and try to put them in this box to make them work for you. Like, I only want this person in my life if they're going to treat me this way, because if I'm not treated this way, then I don't feel good about myself, and I really need to feel good about myself. And that's not fair to anybody, including yourself, right? So eliminating all of these labels that get placed on us and getting back to a point of just emptiness, and then learning to operate right from that point of emptiness. So I learned that in order for me to move forward, I had to go backwards, I guess is a good way to put it. And, you know, and I was raised Christian, and a lot of the things that I learned in Christianity, once I applied a Buddhist perspective to them, and this hearing voices phenomenon began to make more sense. Like when Jesus said, you must be born again, right? You got to go back. You have to go back to a point of emptiness, go back to a point of nothingness where you knew nothing. And then see what's truthful from there. Now that you are in a place in your life where you have the ability to be aware and reason right? Go back to prior to when everything was placed on you, that the world put on you and that you put on yourself erroneously, and see what's truthful then, and then what you find in that moment is that all of us come into this world and none of us have any clue what we're doing here, right? And that everything else on top of that is a sign of intelligence, really. They just want to show you how smart they are, right? And I can go on TikTok or I can go on YouTube and I can be bombarded with TikTok spirituality and YouTube enlightenment constantly over and over again. And everybody's telling me exactly what the truth is, right? And the big bold letters written on these things, the truth exposed, open your third eye in 30 seconds, right? All these things that are very captivating because people don't want to be confused. People don't want to be confused. But you are, and that's okay. That's what I'm saying. To go back to that point of inherent confusion when you came into this world empty and knew absolutely nothing is unanimous. Nobody is immune from that. Nobody comes into this world knowing a damn thing, right? So we're just empty. We're waiting to be filled with something that other people fill us with. And they fill us in school and with religion and with teachings and with doctrines and what's right and what's wrong. And then with derogatory terms and nice things. And we're just pulled in this game of tug and war our entire lives with all of these labels, trying to not be confused, trying to avoid our inherent state of confusion. So if we can, I shouldn't say we, but I had to get back to that point, right? And remember what I forgot, that I don't know anything, right? And then the quote by Socrates makes sense. I know that I am intelligent because I know that I know nothing. Really let that resonate, right? Because with this TI experience, you come to find that truth, right, which is the alleviation for confusion, is the unraveling of all the lies. And that's what the voices do. They lie. They exploit and expose and highlight all the lies, all the lies. That's all that these voices are, is a representation of lies. It's an intentional deceit. And, and I've come to for now, because things are always changing and molding into something else, and my mind gets quieter as the days go on. But I don't believe that the voices have an agenda, really. I think that they have intention, and that intention is to deceive and to lie. But I don't believe that there's an actual agenda with any of this, right? The agenda is up to us, whether we get a gun and spray a school, or we kill ourselves, or we unravel all of the lies pragmatically and return back to a place of homeostasis and nothingness and love, is irrelevant to the voices, to this phenomenon. It has no agenda, but it does have intention, and that is to deceive you. But the more of these lies and these labels that you can get rid of, the more you'll uncover truth, the more the truth about yourself that you'll uncover. You'll start dropping anger because you don't need it, right? Like, it's really, you'll start dropping hatred. And the voices start going away because there's nothing there. If they don't lie, they don't really have a whole heck of a lot to say. Okay. Like, even when they say nice things to me, there was usually an ulterior motive anyway, and that was usually just to deceive and lie again. So, you have to learn to really, I had to learn to really just not pay attention to anything that they said. And then come into a state of non-responsiveness, no response, silence, to not be so responsive to the voices at all. Implementing a practice of meditation with all of this. So, I had to ask myself a question with a lot of these realizations and these understandings. Sure, I came into the world, with nothing accumulated yet. And yet, inherently, I needed love, right? So we don't come into the world searching truth. We come into the world searching love. It's inherent within all of us. Those are two things, those are two truthful observations that can be, realized just through a simple practice of inference, that are unanimous with all human beings. We come into this world and none of us have any clue what we're doing here, but we immediately need the love and affection of another human being. And we see right then and there the problem and solution to our very existence, right? We're inherently confused, but we also inherently need love. And somewhere along the line, as I was growing up, I forgot that I needed love. And I began to replace love with, romanticizing, with affectionate words that don't really mean anything, with not learning from the sufferings that I was going through, with the tough guy act, with my ego. My ego began to suffocate, love, and compassion and empathy for other people. So, when I was able to return back to those two things and then realize those two things, I began to apply them to everything, every other person, and the people that I sponsor, I ask them all the time, have you embraced your inherent state of confusion? Have you embraced it? And when I say embrace, have you affectionately held it in your arms? Have you fully embraced your inherent state of confusion? Do you accept that you came into this world knowing nothing? And then when they can get to that point and they say, yeah, that's a true statement. Well, then the question becomes, do you embrace other people's inherent state of confusion? Because now that's flipped outward, right? And then when you can say, yes, I see that everybody else is also confused. Well, now I can see everybody else as myself and myself as everybody else, right? And we're all equally as confused. And we all equally need love, and most of us have forgotten what we really need. So I'll end this one there, and it seems like a good first session. So if you've taken the time to listen to this, I hope you got something out of it, and you can return back to or at least begin the practice of implementing that understanding into everything and returning back to a place of peace and love, right? Okay. All right. Thank you. And all right. Take care.